Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to look into a new technology being introduced in the upcoming patch called Gambesons. It's a reference to a type of padded armor, and fittingly adds +1 pierce armor to the militia line. It'll be available at the barracks in Castle Age after researching supplies, extending that bit of the tech tree. The main thing I'm interested in here is whether or not this tech is a big deal, and if there's any context where you might notice a large improvement. Considering the fact that Malian long swordsmen already have +2 pierce armor for free as a civ bonus, and another +1 in Imperial Age, while this is just a +1 that you have to pay for, so right away it may not sound overwhelming. On the other hand, many infantry civilizations get this tech, so in many cases it's going to be stacking on top of existing bonuses. That's not to say every civilization gets this tech, and actually it's only about half of them. That's obviously so the devs have more flexibility and can individually pick civilizations who benefit and exclude ones who would be too good. Notice Goths and Malians in particular are lacking it for balanced reasons, with Goths probably not getting it because they don't want to give them supplies. To give some context, long swords, and champions for that matter, have 1 base pierce armor, and in Castle Age at least you can add up to 2 more from the blacksmith. So we're talking about this new technology improving longswords from 3 to 4 pierce armor in Castle Age to now match the knight, and potentially from 5 to 6 pierce armor in Imperial Age for a civilization that has all infantry blacksmith techs. Now, right off the top, I think it's worth asking the question, is a lack of pierce armor really the problem with swordsmen? And going into this, I would say that's actually not their biggest issue. Instead, for longswords in particular, the big things that come to mind are first they have low mobility, so they can't pick fights like knights can, and have difficulty raiding villagers. They also require a lot of upgrades, made even more now with this change, and cost almost entirely food, which is slower to gather than wood and gold, and competes with creating villagers for any food that you have. The point is, infantry have a lot of headwinds already, and traditionally on top of that, they're also easily countered by archers and just about any ranged unit. So with that context, let's look at some matchups and see if this at least addresses that weakness. Are we talking about doubling their resistance to arrows, or is the change just too small to matter? We'll start off in Castle Age, assuming full upgrades all around. Probably the most common things longswords will run into are crossbows and town centers with bodkin arrow. In this case, it's a pretty big difference, going from 15 shots before this tech to 20 shots after, for a 33% improvement in survivability. Now, crossbows are admittedly a little tricky to talk about because often you're against a large group that's focus firing. So for a group of 10 or a group of 20, this doesn't change the math at all, where they still need 2 or 1 focus fired shots to kill long swordsmen in those cases respectively. Instead, this is going to be most significant against groups between 15 and 19 crossbows, where you go from 1 to 2 focus fired shots needed. In fairness, even outside of edge cases like this, when things get messy, just taking 25% less damage is what I'd consider a significant change. Longswords also have a bit of bonus damage against buildings as well, and they will be a little scarier at tearing down a town center, as on average they'll each take 5 extra arrows. So far, this tech isn't looking that bad, but this is nothing compared to what it does against skirmishers. Typically, an elite skirmisher with its 5 attack requires 30 javelins to take out a long swordsman with defensive upgrades, as it does 2 damage at a time. Adding just 1 more pierce armor to the mix though means longswords now take 60 or double the number of javelins. Elite skirmishers suddenly become almost hard countered by longswords, and quite possibly because of this, a lot of the archer civilizations, like Britons, Chinese, Mayans, Ethiopians, and Vietnamese, don't have Gambesons, as maybe there's concerns about longswords and archers being a difficult combination for some civilizations to counter. It really brings up the question though, that if Gambesons is so effective at safely absorbing javelins, why these guys aren't wearing them? Very suspicious. Of course, as much as it's nice to speculate about a new tech, I don't want to oversell things here, and knights are still better in almost every way against skirmishers, having more HP than the longsword, the same final pierce armor, and they're faster. Longswords just become yet another incredibly effective counter, but probably not the best one. Now, a lot of what's going on in this situation is the skirmisher's low attack, and we'll notice here if we look at some other ranged units that, as you might assume, the higher their attack, the less impact Gambesons will have. To start by moving up 1 level, Cavalry Archers, Elephant Archers, Organ Guns, and Longbows all have 8 attack against longswords, and in this case, the +1 pierce armor only lets them survive 25% longer, compared to 33% against the crossbow. Already, this is probably bordering on what you would find noticeable in a game, though against a group of 12, 13, or 14 Cavalry Archers specifically, this would be significant, as they wouldn't be able to take you out in one shot anymore. To give a bit of a concrete example, if we balance resources with a Bengali Elephant Archer against longswords, the ones with Gambesons win with about half their HP left, while longswords without end with a third of their HP. That's certainly enough to be noticeable side by side, but arguably is not a radically different outcome. Moving into the next level though, we have a Scorpion with 12 attack, and now we're down to just a 14% improvement in longevity, from 7 to 8 bolts required to take out a longsword. It's not nothing, but in many cases wouldn't be enough to swing a fight, and to the eye test, it's a very similar level of effectiveness, as there's already so much randomness with units picking targets that a difference that small just isn't obvious a lot of the time. At least mathematically, it is doing something, but when we get to the real heavy hitters like Slingers, Conquistadors, or Janissaries with 16 or 17 attack, there's actually no difference, even theoretically, in how longswords perform, taking 5 hits either way. It's the same deal with Castles, who also take them out in 2 shots, with or without this tech. Now personally, I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense that for something like a skirmisher with low attack, Gambesons has a big impact. And I'd even say it's still important against crossbows, town centers, and cavalry or elephant archers. But as we get into ranged units with more attack, we eventually get to the point this tech just doesn't do much of anything. For a generic civilization, I don't think this will bring longswords into the meta or anything like that. Though for a civ like Celts, Japanese, or Vikings, this could be helpful for a longsword in siege push, as that's already helped out by those civs' other bonuses. Alternately, you sometimes see longswords as an equal counter, and this would help them resist any ranged units mixed in there to some degree. American civilizations who rely on archers, skirmishers, and eagles will presumably run into longswords more often now, or have a bit more difficulty with them if they do. Now, usually I go into the same level of depth in Imperial Age and break down all the matchups, but I'll show you guys the numbers, and the story is basically identical with the same general pattern. In Imperial Age, champions again hold up about 30% better against arbalesters, they take double the javelins from Elite Skirmishers, and we have the same story, where the bonus helps less and less against higher attack units, until once again you reach hand cannoneers, where this tech has functionally no impact. It's safe to say, again, by far the biggest impact is when fighting skirmishers, archers, and town centers. Now, of course, this is going to make champions for about half of civilizations even better as an anti-trash unit in the late game. They already performed well against halberdier and skirmishers, with Hussar as a more debatable counter, but for civilizations that have all the infantry upgrades and now Gambesons, skirmishers are just not a threat to even two-handed swordsmen with their slightly lower HP. I could see this being picked up at least semi-regularly by Vikings, Japanese, Slavs, Malay, Celts, Burmese, Aztecs, or Bulgarians in Imperial Age. Dravidians with discounted barracks techs might also be tempted, and I think there's also some potential in mixing champions with arbalesters as a skirmisher damage sponge, with infantry adding at least some sort of threat against enemy buildings. Traditionally, light cavalry or hussar would fill that role as a meat shield for arbalesters, but don't have a bonus against buildings. And now with champions taking potentially double the previous number of javelins, this might lead to the militia line being a bit more popular for weak cavalry civs if you're seeing a lot of enemy skirmishers. Now, one side note I should make is that for some civilizations, this might put their infantry unique units in an awkward spot. Of course, this tech only applies to the militia line, so any unit that was an alternative to that just got a bit worse in a relative sense. The big ones that come to mind are the Samurai, Jaguar Warrior, Karambit Warrior, Berserk, and Woad Raider, who all now end with 1 less pierce armor than the Swordsman line, and the Urumi Swordsman, who ends up with 2 less. Some of those units have other selling features and bonuses to differentiate them, but the impact on those unique units may be that they're seen less often. Remember, this change also isn't happening in isolation. The longsword, two-handed swordsman, and champion upgrades are also being sped up on this patch, as well as the research time for supplies. Even adding in this new technology to research, it's still faster to tech in a champion than it was before. So that's the new Gambesons tech, where I think it's helpful and where it isn't. Overall, I think it helps a bit with long swordsmen in siege plays, but it's really Imperial Age against skirmishers, where I expect to see the most impact. Either way, hopefully it helps put the new tech into a bit better perspective and gives an idea of how players may try to use it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.